Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council and tried not to show her fear. Around her, representatives from 40 different species waited in silence. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like they were made of living crystal. All of them were staring at her. The hologram in the center of the room showed a map of the galaxy. Red zones covered nearly a third of the space. Those were territories controlled by the Kresh Dominion. The war had been going on for 40 years. Millions had died on both sides. The Council recognizes Earth's representative, announced High Chancellor Vorn, a tall being with 4 arms and skin like polished stone. You have been summoned to fulfill your obligation. Humanity must contribute forces to the war effort. Sarah had known this was coming. When Earth joined the Galactic Council 6 months ago, everyone said it was a great honor. Nobody mentioned that membership came with a price. That price was soldiers. How many troops does the Council require? Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady. We expect each member species to contribute proportionally, Vorn replied. For humanity, that would be approximately 2 million soldiers and 600 warships. Sarah felt her stomach drop. 2 million people. Earth had armies, yes, but sending that many into space into a war they barely understood would be devastating. She opened her mouth to negotiate, but another voice cut through the chamber. 2 million humans? The speaker was Commander Zelti, a reptilian warrior from the Draxon system. His species had been fighting the Kresh for decades. What good will they do? No offense to our newest members, but humans have never fought in space. They barely have faster-than-light travel. They will be slaughtered in their first engagement. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Sarah felt her face grow hot with anger and shame. Zelthi was not entirely wrong. Human military doctrine was built around fighting on Earth, with Earth technology against other humans. The Kresh were something else entirely. The Kresh Dominion fought with overwhelming numbers and brutal efficiency. Their soldiers were fearless, their ships were heavily armored, and their tactics were simple. Charge forward and crush the enemy with superior force. For 40 years, every species in the galaxy had adapted to match them. Battles were now massive affairs with millions of soldiers clashing in direct combat. The human contribution is not negotiable, Vorn said firmly. However, we understand Earth's limitations. We will assign human forces to a secondary theater, somewhere they can learn without putting our primary offensives at risk. Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew it was pointless. Earth needed the Council. They needed the technology, the trade routes, and the protection that membership provided. They could not say no. We accept the Council's decision, she said quietly. We will send our forces. 3 weeks later, General Marcus Moss stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the Verlac system grow larger on the view screen. Behind his ship, 49 other human vessels followed in formation. 50 ships, 50,000 soldiers. That was all Earth could spare for this mission. The Verlac system consisted of a dying star and 6 planets. 4 of the inner planets had moons, and every single one of those moons was occupied by the Kresh. Intelligence reports said there were 3 million Kresh soldiers spread across those moons. 3 million against 50,000. The odds made Moss want to laugh. Or cry, he was not sure which. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Council observer ship, reported Lieutenant Zhang from the communications station. Put it through, Moss said. The view screen shifted to show Thelrix, the Council's designated observer for this operation. Thelrix belonged to a species called the Vortian, tall and thin with silver skin and large dark eyes. He had been assigned to monitor humanity's first military deployment. General Moss, I have reviewed your deployment plans, Thelrix said, his voice carrying a tone of what might have been concern. I notice you are not positioning your forces for a direct assault. May I ask what your strategy is? Moss smiled slightly. We're going to observe the enemy first, study their patterns, learn their routines. Thelrix's expression was difficult to read, but Moss thought he detected disappointment. General, the Council expects engagement, not observation. The Kresh must be removed from this system. They will be, Moss replied, just not the way you expect. After the transmission ended, Moss turned to his staff. Major Patricia Hayes, his intelligence officer, was already pulling up detailed scans of the Kresh positions. They're spread thin, Hayes observed. Large concentrations on the major moons, but the smaller outposts are isolated. Standard Kresh deployment. They rely on their numbers to intimidate. Good, Moss said. Then they won't notice when those numbers start to shrink. Captain Rodriguez, who commanded the special operations teams, leaned forward. "Sir, the men are ready. We can deploy teams to all 4 moons within 24 hours. "Not yet," Moss said. "First, we watch. I want to know everything. When they eat, when they sleep, when they change shifts. I want to know which commanders are competent and which ones are stupid. I want to know if they argue with each other, if they follow orders, if they believe in their mission." The other officers exchanged glances. This was not how wars were fought in space. Every species in the galaxy had learned to match the Kresh head-on. Reconnaissance was minimal. Battles were quick and brutal, but Moss had studied every war in human history. He had read about Vietnam, where a technologically superior force lost to guerrilla fighters who knew the terrain. He had studied the ancient Chinese strategist Sun Tzu, who wrote that the best victory is the one achieved without fighting. He had analyzed every insurgency, every resistance movement, every time a smaller force defeated a larger one through unconventional means. Earth could not beat the Kresh in a straight fight. But Earth did not have to. Moss just needed to make the Kresh beat themselves. Over the next 2 weeks, human forces established positions throughout the Verlax system. They did not attack. They did not make their presence obvious. They simply watched and recorded. Sensor drones too small to detect mapped every Kresh installation. Human intelligence officers intercepted communications and learned the Kresh language. Special forces teams practiced moving through hostile territory without being seen. On the Council observer ship, Thelrix grew more confused each day. He had witnessed dozens of military campaigns, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans were doing nothing. They just floated in space and watched. Back on the Council station, Ambassador Chen received daily reports from General Moss. The reports were brief and revealed little. "Reconnaissance continues," they said. "Enemy patterns identified. Preparation phase proceeding as planned." When she asked what the plan actually was, Moss simply replied, "Operational security, Ambassador. The less people who know, the better." In the Galactic Council chambers, Commander Zelthi openly mocked humanity's deployment. 3 weeks and they have not fired a single shot," he announced during a strategy session. "I told you they were useless. They are too afraid to fight." Sarah said nothing. She trusted Moss, but she was beginning to wonder if Zelthi was right. What were they doing out there? The answer came on day 19. A Kresh commander on Verlax 3 tried to contact one of his outposts for a routine check-in. There was no response. He tried again. Still nothing. Growing concerned, he sent a squad to investigate. The squad found the outpost intact. The walls were undamaged, the power was running, and the defense systems were active. But there was not a single Kresh soldier anywhere. 5,000 soldiers had simply vanished. The meals in the dining hall were half-eaten. The weapons were still in the armory. Personal belongings remained in the barracks. It was as if everyone had stood up in the middle of their daily routine and walked away. But there were no signs of where they had gone. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just empty buildings and silence. When the report reached the main Kresh command center, the commander stared at it in disbelief. 5,000 soldiers did not just disappear. It was impossible. Then, 2 days later, it happened again. Another outpost went silent. When reinforcements arrived, they found the same thing. Everything intact, everyone gone. On the 3rd day, a Kresh patrol found something new. Written on the wall of an abandoned outpost in perfect Kresh script were 3 words. "We are watching." Fear, like a virus, began to spread through the Kresh ranks. And on the bridge of the UES Defiance, General Moss smiled. The war had begun. Thelrix could not sleep. For 3 nights now, he had lain in his quarters aboard the observation ship, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what he was seeing, or rather what he was not seeing. The disappearances were spreading. In the past week, 7 Kresh outposts had gone silent. That was over 30,000 soldiers simply gone. The Kresh commanders were sending investigation teams to each location, and every report was the same. No bodies, no damage, no clues. Just empty bases and that same message appearing in random places. "We are watching." Thelrix had reviewed the sensor logs 100 times. There were no signs of human ships approaching the Kresh positions. No energy weapons had been fired. No explosions had been detected. It was as if the soldiers had been erased from existence, but that was impossible. Soldiers did not just vanish. He decided to visit the human flagship and demand answers. When he materialized on the bridge of the UES Defiance, General Moss greeted him with a calm smile. "Observer Thelrix, welcome. What can I do for you?" "You can explain what is happening," Thelrix said, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. 30,000 Kresh soldiers have disappeared, and I have detected no military action from your forces. How is this possible? Moss gestured to the tactical display. We're fighting a war, Observer. Results are what matter. But there have been no battles, Thelrix insisted. No combat, no casualties on either side. Where are the Kresh soldiers going? That's classified information, Moss replied pleasantly. Operational security. Thelrix felt his patience wearing thin. He had reported to the Council that humans were incompetent, afraid to engage. But this was something different. Something he did not understand, which made him deeply uncomfortable. The Council has a right to know your methods, he said. Moss's smile faded slightly. Observer, with all respect, the Council gave us this assignment because they expected us to fail. They put us in a secondary theater with impossible odds because human lives are considered expendable. So forgive me if I do not feel obligated to share every detail of our operations. The words stung because they were true. Thelrix had read the Council's private assessments. Humanity was expected to lose badly in the Verlac system. It would be a learning experience, they said. A way for humans to understand real warfare before being given more important assignments. Nobody expected them to actually win. On Verlax 3, Kresh Commander Vrak paced in his command center and tried to contain his growing panic. He had been a soldier for 20 years, had fought in dozens of campaigns, and had never felt fear like this. It was not the fear of battle or death. It was the fear of the unknown. Another outpost had gone silent this morning. That made 8. He had sent his best troops to investigate, led by his most trusted officer. They had been gone for 6 hours and had not reported back. Vrak tried to tell himself that it was just a communications problem, but he knew better. Communications did not fail 8 times in the same way. Something was taking his soldiers, and he had no idea what it was or how to stop it. His second-in-command, a younger officer named Threx, approached nervously. Sir, the troops are talking. They say this place is cursed. They say invisible demons are hunting us. Demons are not real, Vrak snapped. We are facing an enemy, a physical enemy that can be killed. Then where is this enemy? Threx asked. We have not seen a single human soldier, not one. Yet our people keep vanishing. Vrak had no answer. He turned to the tactical display, studying the positions of his remaining forces. He had started with 3 million soldiers spread across 12 major installations. Now 8 of his smaller outposts were empty. If this continued, a message alert interrupted his thoughts. It was from High Command, finally responding to his reports about the disappearances. Vrak opened it with relief, expecting reinforcements and new orders. Instead, the message was brief and cold. Stop making excuses. The humans have only 50,000 soldiers. Find them and destroy them. That is an order. Vrak stared at the message. High Command did not believe him. They thought he was incompetent, that he was making up stories to cover his failures. But his soldiers were really disappearing. This was actually happening. Increase patrols, he ordered Threx. Double the guards at every installation. No one goes anywhere alone. If the humans are out there, we will find them. But the humans were not where the Kresh were looking. Deep beneath the surface of Verlax 3, in a network of natural caves that the Kresh had never bothered to explore, Captain Rodriguez sat with his special operations team and reviewed the mission recordings. On a portable screen, he watched footage from the latest operation. The attack had taken place at midnight, Kresh Standard Time. Rodriguez's team had approached the target outpost using terrain masking equipment that bent light and absorbed sensor signals. To Kresh sensors, they were invisible. The team had spent hours studying the outpost's routines. They knew when the guards changed shifts, when the soldiers ate, when they slept. They knew which doors were locked and which were left carelessly open. They knew everything. They had entered through a service tunnel, moving in complete silence. Then they had released the gas. It was a human invention, a sedative so powerful that anyone who breathed it would fall unconscious within seconds. The Kresh never knew what hit them. While the soldiers slept, Rodriguez's team had worked quickly. They stripped everyone of their weapons and equipment. They placed small explosive charges on critical systems, set to detonate harmlessly after the team left. They sprayed those 3 words on the wall. We are watching. Then they had loaded the unconscious Kresh onto transport vehicles and driven them to the cave networks. By the time the Kresh woke up, they were in holding cells, guarded by humans they had never seen coming. 32,000 prisoners so far, Rodriguez reported to General Moss during their daily briefing. 0 casualties on either side. The men are getting good at this. Good, Moss replied, but we need to escalate. It is time for Phase 2. Phase 2 began with a simple hack. Human cyber warfare specialists had been studying Kresh computer systems for weeks. The Kresh used advanced technology, but their security was predictable. They never imagined anyone would try to infiltrate their networks because, in their experience, wars were won with guns and ships, not with code. Major Hayes and her intelligence team had found dozens of weaknesses. Now they exploited them. They inserted false data into Kresh sensor systems, making imaginary human ships appear on their screens. They altered supply manifests, making it look like critical resources were running low. They intercepted communications and subtly changed the messages, creating confusion and distrust. The Kresh commanders started receiving contradictory orders. One would say to reinforce the southern installations, another would say to abandon them. Supply ships would arrive at the wrong locations. Patrol routes would overlap, causing units to waste time searching areas that other units had already cleared. At first, the Kresh thought it was just normal bureaucratic confusion, but as the problems multiplied, paranoia began to set in. Officers started to suspect that human spies had infiltrated their ranks. They began to distrust their own subordinates. On the Council observation ship, Thelrix noticed something strange in the Kresh communications that his ship was monitoring. The messages were becoming more frantic, more confused. The Kresh were starting to fall apart, and he still had not seen the humans do anything overtly aggressive. He decided to take a shuttle down to Verlax 3 and see the situation firsthand. When he arrived at the main Kresh command center, he was shocked by what he found. Commander Vrak looked like he had not slept in days. His eyes were wild and his hands trembled as he worked. "Observer Thelrix," Vrak said when he noticed him. "Have you come to help us? Or just to watch us die?" "I came to assess the situation," Thelrix replied carefully. "Commander, what is happening here?" Vrak laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "What is happening?" "I will tell you what is happening. 50,000 humans are defeating 3 million Kresh soldiers without firing a shot. That is what is happening." "That is impossible," Thelrix said. "I would have said the same thing 2 weeks ago," Vrak replied. He pulled up a map of the system. Nearly a quarter of the red markers representing Kresh installations were now blinking. Blinking means we have lost contact. 30 outposts, 100,000 soldiers, all gone, vanished, and I have never even seen a human soldier. Thelrix studied the map. The pattern of disappearances was not random. The humans were targeting isolated outposts first, places where help could not arrive quickly. They were deliberately avoiding direct confrontation while maximizing psychological impact. It was brilliant and terrifying. "Have you requested reinforcements?" Thelrix asked. "High Command sent 400,000 troops," Vrak said bitterly. "They arrived 2 days ago. Do you know where they are now?" "Searching the asteroid field for the human base. They have found nothing. The humans are ghosts. They are everywhere and nowhere." At that moment, the lights in the command center flickered. Then the holographic displays went dark. Emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in a red glow. "Not again," Vrak whispered. "What is this?" Thelrix asked. "This is what the humans do," Vrak replied. "They take control of our systems. They make us blind." The Kresh prisoner sat in the holding cell and tried to remember how he had gotten there. His name was Korvac, and he had been a soldier in the Dominion Army for 12 years. He had fought in 7 campaigns and had never been captured. He had certainly never surrendered, but he had not surrendered this time either. He did not remember being captured at all. One moment he had been on guard duty at his outpost, and the next moment he woke up in this cell with a dozen other confused soldiers. The cell was strange. It was clean, well lit, and actually comfortable. There were beds, a bathroom, and regular meals. The human guards were polite and never raised their voices. It was nothing like the Kresh prisoner camps where captured enemies were treated harshly and kept in terrible conditions. This confused Korvac more than anything. In his culture, prisoners were a burden and an embarrassment. They were people who had failed in battle, but the humans seemed to actually care about their prisoners' well-being. One of the human guards, a young woman with dark skin and kind eyes, stopped by the cell. "How are you all doing today? Do you need anything?" Korvac stared at her. "Why do you ask?" "We are your enemies." The guard smiled slightly. "That does not mean we have to treat you badly. We follow rules about how to treat prisoners. Everyone deserves basic dignity." "The creche do not have such rules," Korvac said. "I know," the guard replied. "We have heard stories. But we are not creche, we are human. We do things differently." After she left, one of Korvac's cellmates, a soldier named Vresh, whispered, "They are trying to trick us, to make us weak," but Korvac was not sure. He had been taught that humans were primitive and weak, that they would be easy to defeat. But weak enemies did not capture 30,000 soldiers without firing a shot. Primitive species did not have technology that could make their soldiers invisible and their ships undetectable. What else had the Dominion lied to them about? In another part of the cave complex, Major Hayes was conducting an interview with a creche officer they had captured. His name was Threx, and he had been second in command at one of the larger installations. "Tell me about your command structure," Hayes said, keeping her voice neutral and calm. Threx glared at her. "I will tell you nothing." "That is fine," Hayes replied. "We already know most of it anyway. Your commanders do not trust each other very much, do they? We have been reading your communications. A lot of blame being thrown around. A lot of anger." Threx's expression shifted slightly. Hayes caught it. She was trained in reading micro-expressions, tiny changes in facial features that revealed true emotions. That shift told her she had hit on something important. "The thing about fear," Hayes continued, "is that it makes people turn on each other. When soldiers start disappearing and no one knows why, trust breaks down. People start looking for someone to blame. I imagine your commanders are blaming each other right now." Threx said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Hayes made a note and moved on to the next question. Every prisoner was interviewed this way. The humans were gathering intelligence, learning everything they could about creche psychology, culture, and military structure. They were looking for weaknesses, not in technology or tactics, but in the creche mindset, and they were finding plenty. Back on the council station, Ambassador Chen was dealing with a different kind of battle. Commander Zelti had called an emergency session to discuss the situation in the Verlac system. "The humans are violating the conventions of war," Zelti announced to the assembled council members. "They are not engaging in honorable combat. They are using trickery and deception." "The conventions of war do not prohibit deception," Chen replied calmly. "They prohibit unnecessary cruelty and the targeting of civilians. We have done neither." "You have made over 30,000 soldiers disappear." Another council member, a being made of crystalline structures, chimed in. "Where are they? What have you done with them?" "They are prisoners of war," Chen said. "They are being held in secure locations and treated according to human standards for prisoner rights. They are fed, housed, and receive medical care. None have been harmed." This caused a stir in the chamber. The concept of prisoner rights was not universal. Many species, including the creche, did not have such concepts. "This is weakness," Zelti said. "You should be eliminating the enemy, not feeding them." "That is your way," Chen replied, meeting his eyes. "It is not ours. We believe that even enemies deserve basic humane treatment. And before you call it weakness, consider this. Our methods have removed 100,000 creche soldiers from the battlefield without losing a single human life. Can you say the same about your campaigns?" The chamber fell silent. Zelti had lost tens of thousands of his own soldiers in various battles against the creche. Every species had. The war had been incredibly costly for everyone involved. Yet here were the humans, winning without any casualties at all. High Chancellor Vorn raised one of his 4 hands. "What is your ultimate objective, Ambassador Chen? You cannot simply capture the entire creche army." "Why not?" Chen asked. "If we can make their soldiers disappear faster than they can replace them, if we can make every creche commander afraid to give orders because they do not know who to trust, if we can win without massive battles and massive casualties, then why should we not do exactly that?" It was a question that no one could answer. In the Verlac system, the situation was deteriorating rapidly for the creche. The 400,000 reinforcements that High Command had sent were now scattered across the moons and asteroid fields, searching for an enemy they could not find. They were exhausted, confused, and starting to desert. General Moss watched the creche fleet movements from his command center and smiled. The Kresh were doing exactly what he wanted them to do, wasting resources, chasing ghosts, and falling apart from within. "Sir, we are receiving reports from our infiltration teams," Lieutenant Zhang said. "The Kresh are finding more messages." Moss nodded. His psychological operations teams had been busy. They were leaving messages in increasingly creative places. Some were painted on the sides of buildings. Others were embedded in digital displays. A few were even found carved into the personal quarters of Kresh officers. The messages were simple but effective. "We know where you are. You cannot hide from us. Your commanders are lying to you. How many more will vanish before you surrender?" Each message was designed to increase paranoia and fear. And it was working. Kresh soldiers were becoming afraid to sleep, afraid to go on patrol, afraid to trust their own comrades. Some had started surrendering voluntarily, walking up to human positions with their hands raised. Captain Rodriguez reported that they now had over 150,000 prisoners. The holding facilities were getting crowded, but the prisoners were being well treated. Some were even starting to cooperate, providing information about Kresh operations. One prisoner, Korvac, had become particularly helpful. He had agreed to speak to Major Hayes about Kresh culture and military thinking. "We are taught from birth that strength is everything," Korvac explained during one of their conversations, "that showing mercy is weakness, that enemies must be crushed completely. But that has not worked against humanity," Hayes observed. "No," Korvac admitted. "You are winning, and we do not understand how. You are weaker than us in direct combat, but somehow you are defeating us anyway. It makes no sense." Hayes leaned forward. "Let me tell you something about human history, Korvac. We have fought terrible wars against each other, wars that killed millions. We learned from those wars that the strongest army does not always win. Sometimes the smartest army wins. Sometimes the army that understands psychology and tactics better than the enemy wins." Korvac listened carefully. "Your people fought each other? Why?" "Many reasons," Hayes said. "Resources, territory, ideology, religion. Humans have fought over almost everything imaginable, but each war taught us something. We learned from our mistakes. We learned what works and what does not work. And we learned that the best victory is the one where the fewest people die." This concept seemed to trouble Korvac. "The Kresh do not think this way." "I know," Hayes said. "That is why we are winning." Across the Verlac system, more Kresh installations went dark. Not all of them were captured. Some were simply abandoned as Kresh soldiers fled in panic. Others turned on each other as paranoia set in, with officers accusing their own troops of being human spies. The Kresh High Command watched in horror as their forces in the Verlac system collapsed without a single major battle. They sent increasingly desperate messages demanding that their commanders fight back, engage the enemy, do something other than vanish. But how could you fight an enemy you could not see? How could you engage forces that refused to meet you in battle? How could you defeat an opponent who turned your own fear against you? On the 12th week of the campaign, the Kresh suffered their most humiliating defeat yet. An entire battle fleet, 20 capital ships with 50,000 crew members jumped into the Verlac system to crush the human forces once and for all. General Moss received the alert and smiled. "Right on schedule," he said. The Kresh fleet commander, Admiral Kren, broadcast a message on all frequencies. "Humans, you have nowhere to run. We have brought overwhelming force. Surrender now or be destroyed." There was no response from the human ships. Warlord Kraz stood in the central war room of the Kresh Dominion and tried to control his rage. Around him, his senior commanders shifted nervously. They were all afraid, though none would admit it. Fear was weakness, and weakness was death in Kresh culture. "Let me understand this correctly," Kraz said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We sent 3 million soldiers to the Verlac system. The humans brought 50,000. And now we have lost 2 million of our troops without fighting a single real battle." None of the commanders spoke. What could they say? The facts were undeniable and humiliating. "Where are our soldiers?" Kraz demanded. "Are they dead?" "No, Warlord," one commander finally replied. "Intelligence suggests they are prisoners. The humans are holding them somewhere." "Prisoners," Kraz repeated. The word tasted bitter. In Kresh culture, being captured was the ultimate disgrace. Soldiers were expected to fight to the death. Those who allowed themselves to be taken prisoner had no honor. But 2 million prisoners? That was beyond disgrace. That was catastrophic. The High Council is calling for negotiations, another commander said carefully. They believe the humans cannot be defeated through conventional means. Kraz slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. The High Council are cowards. We negotiate with equals, not with insects who hide in shadows. I will not surrender the Dominion's honor because these humans use tricks and deception. He turned to his tactical display, studying the galactic map. The Verlac system was marked in red. It had become a wound in the Dominion's pride, a festering reminder of their failure. I will show the galaxy that the Kresh cannot be defeated by parlor tricks, Kraz announced. I will draw the humans into real combat and I will crush them. Over the next 2 weeks, Kraz implemented his plan. He ordered a complete withdrawal from the Nexus Prime system, a strategically important location that controlled 3 major trade routes. The withdrawal was made to look hasty and disorganized, as if the Kresh were panicking. Intelligence officers leaked information through channels they knew humans could access. The information suggested that Nexus Prime had been abandoned due to supply problems and low morale. It was presented as an easy target, a system that humanity could capture without significant resistance. They will take the bait, Kraz told his commanders. They are arrogant now, confident in their methods. They will see an opportunity for an easy victory and they will take it. But the withdrawal was not real. Kraz had hidden 2 million troops in the outer regions of the Nexus Prime system. They were positioned in asteroid bases and on the dark sides of moons. Their ships powered down to minimal signatures. To any scanning system, the area would appear empty. When the humans jumped in to claim their prize, Kraz would spring his trap. He would surround them, cut off their escape, and force them into direct combat. Then he would show the galaxy what happened to species that relied on tricks instead of strength. On the council station, Thelrix had been analyzing human tactics for weeks. He had written detailed reports about what he called warfare without war, but the concepts were so foreign that most council members struggled to understand them. He requested a meeting with Ambassador Chen to discuss the situation. The Kresh are withdrawing from Nexus Prime, he told her when they met in a private chamber. The council believes this is because of low morale due to your success in the Verlac system. Chen studied the intelligence reports Thelrix had brought. Something about them bothered her. The withdrawal seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed. What do you think? She asked Thelrix. I think Warlord Kraz is not a fool, Thelrix replied. He has been studying your methods. I think he is trying to force you into the kind of battle he can win. Chen nodded slowly. A trap, possibly, Thelrix said. But I cannot prove it. The intelligence seems genuine, and the Council is pressuring your forces to take advantage of this opportunity. Chen immediately contacted General Moss. She explained Thelrix's suspicions and her own concerns. Moss listened carefully. I think you are right, he said after a moment. This feels wrong. The Kresh do not retreat easily, but I am getting orders from Earth and from the Council to move on Nexus Prime. The politicians see an easy win. What will you do? Chen asked. Moss smiled slightly. I am going to give Warlord Kraz exactly what he wants. Or at least I am going to make him think I am. 3 days later, the human fleet jumped into the Nexus Prime system. It was an impressive sight. All 50 human warships moving in formation, broadcasting their presence openly for the first time since the war began. On his hidden command ship, Warlord Kraz watched the display with satisfaction. They took the bait. All of their ships are here. He waited until the human fleet had moved deep into the system, far from any easy escape route. Then he gave the order. Spring the trap. Surround them. Cut off all exits. 2 million Kresh soldiers and hundreds of ships suddenly powered up and emerged from their hiding places. The human fleet was surrounded on all sides. Kraz opened a communication channel to the human flagship. General Moss, this is Warlord Kraz. You have walked into a trap. You are surrounded and outnumbered 40-1. Your tricks will not save you now. This is real war. Surrender or be destroyed. There was a long pause. Then General Moss appeared on the screen. To Kraz's surprise, the human was smiling. Warlord Kraz, thank you for gathering all your forces in one location. That makes this much easier. Kraz frowned. Makes what easier? This, Moss replied. Suddenly, every display in Kraz's command center went black. Then they flickered back to life, showing error messages and system failures. His weapons officer shouted in alarm. Sir, weapon systems are not responding. Neither is navigation or communications. All around the Nexus Prime system, The same thing was happening to every crash ship. The humans had been inside their networks for months, ever since the war began. They had planted code in crash computer systems, waiting for the right moment to activate it. That moment had arrived. Kraz watched in horror as his carefully laid trap turned into chaos. His ships could not coordinate. Their weapons systems showed friendly ships as enemies and enemy ships as friendlies. Navigation systems provided false coordinates. Communication channels were flooded with contradictory orders. Some ships, thinking they were under attack from their own side, began firing on other crash vessels. Others tried to flee, but their navigation systems sent them in circles or toward obstacles. The entire fleet was falling apart. Then the real attack began. Not from the human ships in the center of the trap, but from smaller forces that had been hiding in the system all along. Human special operations teams that had infiltrated the asteroid bases weeks ago, waiting for this exact moment. These teams launched coordinated strikes on the command ships. They did not try to destroy the vessels. Instead, they boarded them, using the chaos and confusion to move through the corridors with minimal resistance. They stunned crew members, secured bridge sections, and took control of critical systems. Thelrix, watching from his observation ship at a safe distance, could barely believe what he was seeing. The crash trap had become a prison for the crash themselves. Warlord Kraz had brought 2 million soldiers to crush 50,000 humans, and instead he had delivered them directly into human hands. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, General Moss watched the operation unfold with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The plan that he had been preparing since the moment they arrived in the Verlac system. "Sir, we have control of Admiral Kren's flagship," Lieutenant Zhang reported. Kren was one of Kraz's top commanders, captured in the previous battle and now being used to send false orders to other crash ships. "Excellent," Moss said. "Have him order the outer ships to power down and prepare for boarding. Tell them it is a drill to test response times." It was a ridiculous order, but in the chaos and confusion, with crash commanders unable to trust their own sensors and communication systems, many of them obeyed. They powered down their ships, making them sitting targets for human boarding teams. Warlord Kraz tried desperately to regain control of the situation. He broadcast messages on emergency channels, shouting orders to fight back, to ignore the false signals, to engage the enemy. But his messages were intercepted and altered by human cyber warfare teams. His commanders received orders that sounded like they came from Kraz but told them to do exactly the opposite of what he wanted. Within 6 hours, half of the Kresh fleet had been captured. Within 12 hours, that number had risen to 80%. The remaining ships, realizing what was happening, attempted to flee the system. Most of them made it out, but they left behind nearly 2 million prisoners. Kraz himself was among the captured. He sat in a detention cell on a human ship and stared at the walls in shock. He had planned the perfect trap. He had overwhelming numbers and superior position. He should have won easily, but the humans had turned his own trap against him. They had used his confidence and aggression as weapons. They had made him gather all his forces in one place, making it easier to defeat them all at once. A human officer came to his cell. It was Major Hayes, the intelligence specialist. She sat down across from him. "Warlord Kraz," she said respectfully, "I have some questions for you." Kraz glared at her. "I will tell you nothing." The peace negotiations took place on a neutral station in the Andaris system. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat across from High Counselor Vresh of the Kresh Dominion. Between them was a simple table and decades of war. Vresh was an older Kresh, his scales dulled with age, but his eyes still sharp. He had been a warrior in his youth, but now led the diplomatic corps. The fact that the Kresh had even sent a diplomat was significant. For most of their history, they had believed that negotiations were signs of weakness. "Ambassador Chen," Vresh began, "the Dominion acknowledges defeat in the Verlax and Nexus Prime campaigns. We are prepared to discuss terms." Chen nodded. "Before we discuss terms, I want to make something clear. Humanity did not enter this war because we wanted to. We entered because the Council required it. Our goal was never conquest or domination. We simply wanted to end the conflict with minimal loss of life." "You succeeded," Vresh said quietly. "More than 4 million of our soldiers are your prisoners, yet our intelligence indicates that your total casualties are less than 400. 347, Chen corrected, mostly from accidents and equipment failures. We lost only 12 soldiers in actual combat situations, The numbers hung in the air between them. For the Kresh, who had lost millions in this war over the decades, the disparity was staggering. "How did you do it?" Vresh asked. "Our analysts have been studying your tactics for weeks. They still do not fully understand." Chen considered her answer carefully. "We studied your culture, your military doctrine, your psychology. We learned that the Kresh value direct combat and view anything else as dishonorable, so we made sure never to give you the kind of battle you wanted." "You made us afraid," Vresh said. "Yes," Chen admitted. "Fear is a powerful motivator. When your soldiers did not know where we were or how we would strike next, when they could not trust their own sensors and communications, they became paralyzed. Many surrendered because they preferred captivity to the constant uncertainty." Vresh leaned back in his chair. "You treated our prisoners well. Better than we would have treated yours. Why?" "Because we believe that how you treat defeated enemies says more about you than about them," Chen replied. "We could have killed 4 million Kresh soldiers. We had them at our mercy multiple times. But what would that accomplish? More death, more suffering, more reasons for revenge. We wanted to end the war, not perpetuate it." On the council station, Thelrix was preparing his final report on the human campaign. He had spent months observing their operations, and he was still processing what he had witnessed. He called it the Vanishing War in his report. A conflict where armies disappeared not because they were destroyed, but because they were captured, convinced to surrender, or simply frightened into fleeing. A war won without massive battles or massive casualties. High Chancellor, Vorn had requested a private meeting to discuss the report before Thelrix presented it to the full council. "Your observations are remarkable," Vorn said, reading through the document. "You describe human warfare as fundamentally different from anything we have seen before." "Because it is different," Thelrix replied. "Every species in the galaxy fights the same way we always have. We meet force with force. We match our enemy's tactics. We win through superior strength or numbers. But humans do not think that way." "Why not?" Vorn asked. "Because they have fought each other for thousands of years," Thelrix explained. "They have experienced every type of warfare imaginable. Large battles, small skirmishes, guerrilla campaigns, sieges, insurgencies. They have learned from all of it. They understand that different situations require different approaches." Vorn nodded slowly. "And they applied those lessons to us." "Yes," Thelrix said. "They saw that the Kresh fought in a predictable pattern, direct assault, overwhelming force, so humans made sure never to be where the Kresh expected them to be. They attacked psychology instead of fortifications. They targeted morale instead of military installations." "Some council members are calling human tactics dishonorable," Vorn said. Thelrix chose his words carefully. "Honor is a cultural concept. What one species considers honorable, another might consider foolish. The Kresh believed it was honorable to fight to the death and dishonorable to surrender. But where is the honor in dying needlessly? Where is the honor in continuing a war that cannot be won?" Back in the Verlac system, General Moss was touring the prisoner-holding facilities with Captain Rodriguez. The facilities had grown significantly over the course of the campaign. They now held over 4 million Kresh soldiers. "Sir, we have a problem," Rodriguez said. "Actually, it is more of a strange situation than a problem." "Explain," Moss said. "Some of the prisoners do not want to go home," Rodriguez replied. "When we told them the war was ending and they would be repatriated, about 10% asked if they could stay." Moss stopped walking. "They want to stay as prisoners?" "Not as prisoners," Rodriguez clarified. "They want asylum. They want to join human society." Moss thought about this. It made a certain kind of sense. The Kresh prisoners had been treated better by humans than they had ever been treated by their own leaders. They had been given good food, comfortable housing, medical care, and respect. Many had probably experienced kindness for the first time in their lives. "What did you tell them?" Moss asked. "That it was not our decision to make," Rodriguez replied. "That they would have to apply through proper diplomatic channels. But I thought you should know about it." Moss nodded. This was going to complicate the peace negotiations, but it was also a good sign. If Kresh soldiers preferred human captivity to Kresh freedom, that said something important about both societies. Among the prisoners who wanted to stay was Korvac. He had been one of the first captured, and over the months he had developed a good relationship with his guards. He had learned some English and had spent hours talking with Major Hayes about human culture and history. When Hayes heard that he wanted asylum, she came to speak with him personally. "Why do you want to stay?" she asked. Do you not have family in the Dominion? I have a brother, Korvac said. But we were never close. The Dominion teaches us that strength is everything, that emotion is weakness. I was a soldier because that was what was expected. But I never enjoyed it. I never wanted to hurt anyone. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Here, with humans, I have learned that there is more to life than fighting. You have art and music and literature. You value kindness and compassion. Your society is built on cooperation, not domination. I want to be part of that. Hayes felt a deep sadness for him. The creche culture had failed so many of their own people, turning sensitive individuals like Korvac into soldiers against their will. I will help you apply for asylum, she promised. I cannot guarantee you will get it, but I will support your application. The peace treaty was finalized 3 weeks later. The terms were surprisingly generous for the defeated side. The creche would withdraw from all contested systems and pay reparations, but their homeworld and core territories would remain untouched. No creche would be tried for war crimes. Prisoners would be returned within 6 months. The galaxy was shocked by how lenient the terms were. Commander Zelti voiced what many were thinking during a council session. Ambassador Chen, you could have demanded much more. You defeated the creche completely. Why settle for so little? Chen stood before the assembly to answer. Because the goal was never to destroy the creche or humiliate them. The goal was to end the war. Harsh terms would only plant seeds for future conflicts. We want peace that lasts, not victory that breeds resentment. She pulled up a holographic display showing human history. Images of devastation from World War I and World War II appeared. My species learned a painful lesson in our 20th century, Chen explained. After our First World War, we imposed harsh terms on the defeated nations. We humiliated them and crushed their economies. 20 years later, those nations started another even more destructive war. But after the Second World War, we did something different. We helped rebuild the nations we had defeated. We treated them as future partners rather than permanent enemies. She changed the image to show modern Earth. Today, those nations that were once bitter enemies are among our closest allies. We learned that how you treat a defeated foe determines whether you have peace or just a pause before the next war. The council chamber was silent as members absorbed this lesson. It went against everything most species believed about warfare, but they could not argue with the results. Humanity had won decisively while losing almost no one, and now they were securing a lasting peace rather than just a military victory. 5 years passed. The changes in the galaxy were remarkable. Every major military in the galaxy now had a human doctrine division. These divisions studied psychological warfare, information operations, cyber warfare, and non-lethal tactics. Wars were becoming shorter and less bloody. More conflicts were being resolved through negotiation before they escalated to violence. The creche Dominion had undergone dramatic changes. Exposure to human culture through the returned prisoners had sparked a cultural revolution. Younger creche were questioning the old ways, asking why strength and domination had to be the foundation of their society. Some were even advocating for democracy and individual rights. Korvac had been granted asylum and was now living on Earth.